Hey everyone, my name is Smith, and I'm 27 years old. 3 years ago, I walked away from my family's restaurant in New York because I wanted to build one with my own name. My father said I was throwing my future away. My mother cried as I left home. Everyone believed I'd come back within months. They were wrong. 3 years later, my restaurant became one of the busiest places in New York, and the same people who doubted me were waiting in line for a table. This is my story. I grew up in New York City, just a short drive from the Statue of Liberty. Every weekend, my parents and I would visit the waterfront. My father would point toward Lady Liberty and say, "This city rewards people who work hard." He dreamed that one day I'd take over our small family restaurant in Manhattan. But I had a different dream. I wanted to open a modern restaurant that people from all over New York would talk about. One evening, while we were closing the restaurant, I finally looked at my father and said, "Dad, I don't want to inherit this restaurant. I want to build my own." The smile on his face disappeared instantly. That night, our house was silent. My father looked at me and said, "If you leave this restaurant, you're leaving this family behind too." My mother begged us to stop arguing, but my decision was already made. The next morning, I packed one suitcase, left Manhattan, and rented a tiny apartment in Queens, New York. As the subway crossed the East River, I looked back at the Manhattan skyline. In the distance, I could still see the Statue of Liberty. I whispered to myself, "One day, the city will know my name." Life in Queens wasn't easy. During the day, I worked in another restaurant. At night, I walked through the streets of Manhattan, studying successful restaurants, their menus, and their customers. Every weekend, I sat near the Statue of Liberty with a notebook, writing ideas for the restaurant I dreamed of building. I didn't have investors. I didn't have money, but I had something stronger, a dream that refused to die. One rainy afternoon, while walking through Brooklyn, I noticed an old restaurant with a "for rent" sign hanging in the window. The place was dusty. The kitchen was falling apart. Most people walked past it without even looking. But I stopped. The moment I stepped inside, I could already imagine it filled with customers. The owner smiled and said, "Most people think this place is finished." I looked around and quietly replied, "I think it's just getting started." That day, I signed the lease. Every dollar I had saved over the past year was gone. But for the first time, my dream had an address. I couldn't afford contractors, so I became one. Every morning, I worked at my restaurant job. Every evening, I returned to my own restaurant. I painted the walls, fixed broken tables, cleaned the kitchen, built the counter myself. Some nights, I slept on the restaurant floor because I was too exhausted to go home. People walking by laughed. "Nobody's going to eat here." I smiled because they were looking at an old building. I was looking at my future. After weeks of hard work, my restaurant was finally ready. The night before opening, I stood alone inside the dining room. The lights were on. The tables were perfectly arranged. For a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined every seat filled with happy customers. The next morning, I unlocked the front door. My heart was racing. An hour passed. Only 2 people walked in. By closing time, I had served just 5 customers. I counted the money in the register. It wasn't enough. As I locked the door that night, I looked at my restaurant and whispered, "Tomorrow will be better." The next morning, an elderly couple walked into my restaurant. They smiled warmly and ordered lunch. I personally prepared every dish. When they finished eating, the husband looked at me and said, "Young man, this is one of the best meals we've had in New York." Before leaving, he added, "We'll bring our friends next time." For the first time, I felt hope instead of fear. A few days later, a local food blogger quietly visited my restaurant. She recorded a short video while I was cooking. That evening, she uploaded it online. The caption read, "New York's best hidden restaurant." Within hours, thousands of people had watched it. I had no idea my life was about to change. The next morning, I arrived early, but before I could unlock the door, people were already waiting outside. The line stretched down the sidewalk. Customers came from different parts of New York. By lunchtime, every table was full. For the first time, I truly believed my dream had become reality. That evening, one of my relatives sent the viral video to my parents. My father watched it in complete silence. My mother couldn't hold back her tears. They looked at the long line outside my restaurant and finally realized I hadn't walked away from my future. I had built one with my own hands. Within a week, my restaurant became one of the most talked about places in New York. Customers posted photos online. Food bloggers kept recommending it. Reservations were booked days in advance. For the first time, I felt like my dream was finally alive. One afternoon, the front door opened. I looked up and froze. My mother was standing there. She quietly looked around the restaurant. Tears filled her eyes. She smiled and whispered, "You really did it, Smith." For a moment, neither of us could speak. A few days later, my father came to the restaurant. He didn't say a single word. He simply sat at a table. I personally prepared his favorite meal. After taking the first bite, he slowly put down his fork. Then he looked at me and said, "I was wrong about you." Those 5 words meant more to me than all the money I had ever earned. Before leaving, my father stood up in front of everyone. The restaurant became completely silent. He looked at me and said, "I thought you were leaving this family, but you were building a future for it. I'm proud of you, son." My mother couldn't stop crying. For the first time in 3 years, we hugged as a family again. That evening, after the last customer left, I stood outside my restaurant and looked at the bright sign carrying my name. 3 years earlier, I had walked away with one suitcase and a dream. Now, I had everything I had once prayed for, and I realized something. Sometimes, the hardest decision you ever make becomes the best decision of your life. A few months later, business was better than I had ever imagined. Customers traveled from different states just to eat at my restaurant. That's when I made another decision. I wasn't going to stop with just one location. I signed the lease for my second restaurant in New York. The dream that once seemed impossible was growing bigger every day. Success changed my life, but it never changed my heart. I started hiring young people who had no experience, just like someone had once believed in me. Many of them said, "Thank you for giving us our first opportunity." In that moment, I realized success isn't measured by money. It's measured by the lives you help change. One evening, I invited my parents to my restaurant for dinner. This time, they weren't the owners. They were my honored guests. As we sat together, my father looked around the crowded restaurant and smiled. He quietly said, "This place carries your name. And today, it carries our pride too." For the first time in years, we laughed together as a family. After dinner, I drove to the waterfront. Standing there, I looked toward the Statue of Liberty. 3 years earlier, I had stood in the same place with nothing but hope. Now, I had kept the promise I made to myself. One day, New York would know my name. And it finally did. Today, whenever someone asks how I became successful, I don't talk about money. I don't talk about fame. I simply tell them this: never let someone else's fear become the reason you give up on your dream. 3 years ago, I walked away from my family's restaurant with one suitcase. Today, I own the restaurant I once dreamed about. My family stands proudly beside me. And every time I unlock my front door, I'm reminded that believing in yourself can change everything. My name is Smith, and this is how I turned one impossible dream into my family's greatest success.